the way we're going to do it today, so hopefully you're also going to, in order to get to know each other better, facilitate communication towards the end and for our Q&A. It would be great if you could write in the comments section, write your name, write your job, and one or two hobbies. You might actually find a hobby partner throughout this webinar. And any questions you might have about today's topic. So it would be great if you could leave it in the comments section. And we will have an Ask Me Anything session where I'm going to try to answer all the questions. For networking purposes, you're also very welcome to leave your LinkedIn profile in the comments section for further, contact after the webinar is finished. So let's get to the point, because I think a lot of you are very anxious. I wear a lot of hats, and I'm not going to talk too much about my experience because you have LinkedIn for that. You can also ask me a lot of questions, and I'm also going to touch upon, how my experience has led me to discover some of the things that I'm going to share with you today. So I'm not going to mention too much at this part. So I would like to start a bit with sharing what is environmental psychology. Some of you already know, some of you have been exposed more with this concept. But I feel like we should kind of define this field in order to be able to move forward and to understand my learning experience from this angle, because I think it's going to be very helpful in kind of understanding how things happen. And I also mentioned at the beginning that I'm, in the description of the webinar, that I'm going to introduce a concept, native-like learning environment. So it would hopefully make more sense towards the end. So environmental psychology is literally the discipline that studies the influence that different environments, both physical and social, have on human behavior and mindset formation. When we talk about human behavior, when we talk about mindset formation, there is a lot more involved there. So there is a lot more included there, but I didn't write everything. We also have learning outcome, we have work productivity, we have levels of well-being, mental health, and so on. So we have a lot of things. As long as we have people and we have spaces, there's always an interaction between these two, and there's always this interaction will influence our behavior, mindset formation, and so on. But why did a lot of people didn't hear about environmental psychology so far until I started to kind of preach about it? The reason for this is, even though this field has been around from the 70s, all the research that has been done, and it's been a lot, has been done only in academic circles. So what you're seeing on the screen is actually the 4 major academic journals that are doing research in environmental psychology. The 4th one is from Japan, is not from China. Surprisingly, even though the two countries are next to each other, Japan is really big in environmental psychology research, not so much in China. So from what I know, we're the only environmental psychology consultancy company in China. Just to give you a bit of insight on what are some of the research questions that environmental psychology looks into. And I do apologize for the bilingualism because these slides are taken from a different kind of PowerPoint. So you're going to get exposed to a bit of Chinese characters. So one research question is, how do different environments, whether it's family or school or office, hospital, public space, and so on, affect people's psychological state, perception, attitude, behavior, learning outcome, work productivity, pro-environmental behavior, and so on. Another question is, how can we as individuals and groups, by understanding how these elements influence, how these environments influence all these things, about ourselves. How can we use that to kind of maximize our potential, increase our work productivity, enhance our learning outcome, change our mindset, and hopefully we're going to do some mindset changing today as well. Of course, today is going to be more related to language learning, but these are some principles that we can apply in general in our lives. Other questions: what is the connection between our personality and the environment we were brought up in? We all know that we don't get to choose the families that we were born in. We don't get to choose the education that we received. Yet all of these are going to influence the rest of our lives. And believe it or not, even though there's a lot of debate whether it's, which one is more powerful. Is it nature, like our genes, towards our, influencing our personality, or is nurture, like the education that we receive afterwards? And there's an increasing body of research to show that nurture is actually, much more powerful than nature. Our genes account for very, very little for when it comes to personality. And then last but not least, how do we use, environmental design? How do we use this knowledge to lead our environmental behavior? Just to give you an idea about some of the directions that environmental psychology looks at. It's a very broad field, depending on your personal interest. I'm very happy to suggest additional materials that you can look at throughout in the Q&A session. And so everybody wants, a better learning environment, wants a better working environment, living environment, yet very few people actually know what are the elements of this environment and how they combine together and how we can use them to create better learning environments for ourselves. So here I drew a diagram to hopefully help more people understand what are kind of the elements that fit into this environment, and what are the elements that link together to shape this environment. And you can see on the screen that language is considered, so I consider it part of our social environment. Language is what connects us in many ways, but it's an unseen element. And so you can see here kind of a different version. We are kind of at the intersection between a physical environment and social environment. Our offices will not be offices if we would not have some sort of physical environment, right, with our coworkers, our bosses. Schools would not be schools if we wouldn't have some sort of space for that, and then teachers and students and so on. And all of these are kind of, we are at the intersection of these, and they affect our personal abilities, work productivity, mindset, learning outcome, and so on. And language is a big part of that. Is you can also understand it as a link to connect all of these. So in my work, I take language as an element of the environment in which we live, work, and learn. It's a communication tool that we can use to, get closer to people or create enemies. It represents a way of thinking. And so that's why today we're going to talk a bit more about that. That's why learning for English learner, like speakers, learning Chinese is very difficult, or feels very difficult. For Chinese people, learning English, again, feels very difficult because language represents a different way of thinking. And it's also a representation of culture. We kind of tend to understand a lot by looking at or listening carefully how they talk about themselves. We can understand a lot about a culture. For example, because I know that there are a lot of people from the UK who are listening to this webinar. In my experience, I've heard a lot of British people not necessarily identifying themselves as European. It's kind of us and them. This is something that you can feel through language about the culture. It's not right or wrong. It's just how people identify, and so we need to understand that. So how did I discover all these things, and what was my learning path, especially when it comes to language learning? So I came to China in 2012. I need to give a bit of background to my arrival in China. I'm an urban planner by background. And in 2008, with the big financial crisis, I couldn't find a job in urban planning. So, but I still needed to kind of support myself in university. So I started working in marketing, sales. I was a trainer as well. So I had a lot of experience with customer service, including. And so in 2012, a former colleague from uni she was already in Shanghai at that time, and she started sending me messages. We started talking at some point, and she started telling me like, you have been studying urban planning for 5 years and you're doing customer service. You're kind of wasting your life. Come to China. China is developing. Go back to your field of study, and go back to doing architecture. And I said, well, I guess that's okay. I can always go back to do customer service if going to China won't work out, right? But being a very, very curious person, I wanted to kind of know what can China offer. And it was very interesting when I first came here because apart from made in China, just like 3 words, I had no idea about. I hadn't even seen Chinese characters before. That's how ignorant I was. And I hadn't been exposed to anything from Chinese culture. But I guess my former colleague from uni is very persuasive, and I said, well, what? Let's give it a try. So when I came to China, I didn't understand anything. It was all one sound. And to be honest, I even got to wonder how can these people speak a language that I it sounded like bird sound. It sounded like, nothing I had ever heard before. And I at some point I even started wondering, are these people's brains even, biologically, are they even similar with ours? Like, my ignorance was so bad that I started doubting that their brains are biologically different than ours. But because, like going back to reality and stopping to imagine all sorts of weird stories, I remember that as a kid, my parents were always working. There was nobody to take care of me, so I kind of spent a lot of time watching television. I started watching Italian cartoons. Then I grew older, and then I started watching Spanish soap operas. We had Cartoon Network ever since I can remember, so English was part of the menu as well. But then as a kid, I didn't really, I kind of took it for granted. Watching for such a long time, spending so much time in front of the television, I literally found out one day that I could understand everything that those people were saying. And I had never studied, I had never focused on learning that language. Sometimes I would just see that there were like Romanian subtitles, but that was it. And in some situations, not even I didn't even have the subtitles. I just realized that I can understand what those people are saying. But as a kid, I didn't really pay too much attention to that. However, when I came to China and it kind of like I didn't understand anything. It was all one sound. I kind of told to myself, what if, right? What if I will spend as much time as I spent as a child listening to all the other languages, and there will be a moment in life, when I will miraculously start talking in Chinese. So I turned myself into an experiment. So what I started doing, first of all, to listen a lot. I didn't need for the job that I had at that time. They didn't need me to speak Chinese, really. They just needed me to be able to speak English. So I didn't have any incentive to start speaking very fast, or any interest for that matter, because I never thought that I would be able to speak Chinese ever, because I was, I was still in that stage of not understanding anything. But then I thought, let's turn myself into into an experiment and see what happens. And so that's how I started watching a lot of movies in Chinese, listening to a lot of music, podcasts. I also showed you earlier a slide. I kind of threw myself into environments that I didn't really feel comfortable with. Very often, if there were some events, I would be the only foreigner there, because I kind of really wanted to immerse. And I started in Chinese cities. You have these kind of street signs where you have the Chinese characters and you have the pinyin. This kind of like the transliteration of the characters. So I kind of had a feeling of where the syllables finish, right? And then I started randomly learning how to read characters, because in my mind at that point was like, if I'm in China, language is all over the place. But if I can't read, I felt like an illiterate person. If I can't read, then how do I know where am I going, right? So I started randomly learning characters, and then whenever I would see some characters without pinyin, I would try to practice, and I would be very, very happy. It was, my brain felt very excited whenever I could recognize a character, and it gave me a great sense of achievement. But at that time, I really didn't have a feeling for tones, because I think a lot of people struggle with the tones. And I remember when I first came to China, my work colleagues at that time, they actually tried to teach me the tones. And when they told me the tones for the first time, I thought that they were mocking me, because literally couldn't hear the difference. And I was like, dude, but there's no difference there. What are you talking about? And they were very convinced, no, there is. And to be fair, I really started doubting them. I started doubting that they're making fun of me. But anyway, I still continued to listen. Sometimes I would listen, including before going to bed. Like I would fall asleep with my earphones in my ears and listening to Chinese podcasts. I didn't really know what that would be, what would be the result of that. And I didn't really pay attention. I just enjoyed the process, because I was very, intrigued every time I could. Like I was going by public transportation, and I was kind of listening into other people's conversations and wondering, what could they be talking about? Or just watching movies and trying to guess what is it that they're talking about. With movies, it was a lot easier, because most of the Chinese movies have Chinese subtitles, because they have Mandarin as a universal language. They have to have the subtitles in Chinese, and sometimes you have subtitles in English as well, but Chinese subtitles are mandatory. And for me, that allowed me to kind of read the characters. And once you know the characters, once you can read, you know what the character is talking about. So you can make some mental connections. But then you can also listen how other people pronounce the characters. So this for me kind of helped me to get more familiar with the tones, learn more characters, but also get a better understanding of what those people were talking about. And when you watch a movie and you see someone smiling and you look at the context and you're like, oh, okay, so maybe this is what they're talking about. So it was a lot easier to kind of get more information in. And then after 1 year and a half in China, I moved to England to kind of study environmental psychology master's program. And when I got to England, I had the opportunity to, find the ad for an optional course for Chinese. And I decided, you know what? I will go and register, because I never took any Chinese course. It would be interesting, but also being in the UK, I was afraid that I might be losing everything that I had learned by myself without even realizing how much I had progressed. So when I went to sign up for the course, the teacher, who is a Chinese person, but she married a British guy, she was like, "I'm sorry, I can't accept you in the program." And I was like, "What are you talking about? Are you a racist? Like, why don't you allow me to register for this course?" And she tested me for a bit, and she said, "You're way too advanced for what we can offer in this course." And I was like, "What are you talking about? What does that even mean? I have no idea what advanced is. It's all, kind of getting stuff in, and I have no structure. I didn't learn grammar. I didn't learn anything." And so I kind of begged her to let me attend the course. And I said, "Look, whatever you teach, that's what I'll learn. It's fine." Later on, reflecting on the discussion, it kind of occurred to me that I think she was concerned that I might complain about the quality of her course because she thought it was below my level, but I had no idea what my level was. So again, kind of was very happy when she allowed me to take part in it. And that's where I kind of got in touch with structure and a lot of other things. But that was also the reason for me to get a scholarship back in China. And so that's when, in 2014, I came back to China with a full-time scholarship to study Chinese for 1 more year. And by full-time, I mean Monday to Friday, 8:30 a.m. till 12. And so what I realized that when I came back to China, again, this is just to show that in many situations I was the only foreigner in a lot of contexts. And then on this occasion, I was already in Qingdao, where a Romanian rock band came, and they were so happy to see another Romanian person, another foreigner in a group of Chinese people, that they were very excited to take pictures. But then again, this is to show that I kind of always immersed myself in the environment, which is something that a lot of people don't do because of the mindsets that I'm going to talk about further, and that depend a lot on how do we perceive the environment to be, or how do we understand this environment to be. So one of the things that I've noticed is, like that I have involuntarily recreated the native like learning environment. And I'm going to talk a bit about how I understand native like learning environment. So involuntarily, I went back to being a kid. And so I learned Chinese the same way as I did learning Romanian as a kid. I just replaced, when we are kids, we are kind of like learning, we're listening to our parents' sound, right? We spend a lot of time from the time that we are born. We spend a lot of time just listening and making sense of sound. There's no really, we don't understand much as kids. However, the difference with adults, as adults, we say, "I don't understand, so there's no point in listening, so, I'll not listen." But because I didn't have the pressure to learn Chinese, and I was like, "Okay, well, let's see what happens," right? I just immersed myself in sound, and I didn't realize that my brain was actually kind of recording a lot of information. And that's why when I came back to China to study the full-time scholarship, the teaching was in Chinese. There was no English, no other type of language translation, but I could understand a lot of it. So my listening has always been better, a lot better than my speaking, and my writing, and what you name it. But because of that, I noticed that I could pay more attention to the courses, and I would be more engaged in the classes compared to other colleagues, other foreign colleagues that were kind of like, "Oh, I don't understand. This is so boring." and felt demotivated and lost interest, and they were not as progressing as fast as I was. So what I realized is that by listening a lot, I was able to reproduce our native language learning acquisition process. I listened a lot. Then I also learned how to read, because if you have the possibility to live in that particular country, and especially in a country like China where you have characters, right? If you're European, you don't have the experience to read a language that has has drawings literally instead of letters. And so for me, that was the motivation to, okay, if I can read, then I can just take in language and continue learning. So I guess it was just going back to kind of, when we are kids and we learn how to read, but then we have spent a lot of time listening before that, listening to our parents, listening to all the people around us. And then we learn how to read. Of course, at the same time, we also kind of start speaking, and we start building up. We use the small knowledge, the small baggage of knowledge that we have, and then we kind of build upon that. And then that's when you have children, when once they start talking, you have all those questions coming. Mom, what's that? Mom, why is that happening that way? Or dad, why is that happening? So they use language to kind of gain additional knowledge. And I think that this is what we should do in any language that we're trying to learn. And we should focus on the knowledge that we're trying to get when we're trying to learn that particular language, and use knowledge that we're very passionate about, and we use knowledge that is very connected to what we're interested in. So if you're interested in food, then use knowledge, use content that is related to food. If you're interested in constellations, then use content that is related to that, because you'll be much more engaged. And so thinking about what matters to individuals. Because as kids, that's what we've done. But the problem with that is, as kids, we don't really have a choice. But as adults, we do. And so very often we kind of make the choices that are inappropriate. We make the choice to not listen when we don't understand. We make the choice to attend courses that are focused on language learning, but are not focused on content that it's interesting for us, and it's kind of useful for our personal development and so on. And also another thing that happens when learning another language as adults, we tend to think about, why do Chinese people say that? Why blah blah? Chinese people also wonder, why do British people or why do American people say that? We don't say it like that. So it just comes back to being in your own shoes and wondering why other people are thinking in a different way. It's just different. There's no why. It is what it is. The most important thing is whether we accept it or not. As kids, we didn't have any option whether we accept it or not. Whatever our parents said, it was the rule of law. Whereas adults, we're kind of like, oh, I'm not interested in that and that. So this is very important to keep in mind. So what is the mindset that needs to be changed? Because I think we have a lot of misunderstandings when it comes to language learning. And if I would have come, I think that if I would have come with the purpose to learn the language, I would have had the same mentality. But because in my situation, things were different, I involuntarily realized that, it's our mindset that is the problem, not the language itself. So a lot of people think Chinese is hard. Chinese people also think that English is hard. I often have people asking me, which one do you think is more difficult to learn? Is it English or Chinese? And I always answer, it depends who you ask. For English speakers, of course, learning Chinese is more difficult because it's a different way of, it's a different way of thinking. It's a different grammar structure. But for Chinese people, of course, learning English is more difficult because Well, again, for the same reasons. You express yourself differently, you express, all the things. But for me, as having Romanian heritage and having Latin languages as a background, of course, learning English is a lot easier than it would be for Chinese people to learn English, because, well, in English there's a lot of Latin words. The grammar structure is very similar. So it's a lot easier to find some correlations. And so, of course, you get that. And especially if you listen a lot, then if you're exposed to it, then it's a lot easier to learn. But then I realized that the principles of learning a language are exactly the same no matter what language we are learning. If we turn ourselves, if we go back to our childhood and we try to use our children's minds to learn any language, to kind of immerse ourselves in that native-like language acquisition environment, then it becomes super, super easy. So it's not the language in itself that is hard, but our idea, the mentality that we have that language is hard is what is kind of stopping us. And also, actually, what is hard is to learn to change the way you think, to learn to express your emotions in a different way. So take English and Chinese, for example. In Chinese, you have tones. So if you screwed up one tone, then you kind of change the whole meaning of a word. But in English, saying you, it's still you, right? But you're kind of talking about a different emotion. So are you angry? Are you surprised? So in English, we use the tonality of voice to express emotions. Whereas in Chinese, you use that to express meaning. So that's so easy to create misunderstandings, right? And so learning a different language, it just needs to be, number one, willing to change the way you think. And to be fair, at the very beginning, when I started listening to Chinese, one of the reasons why I kind of wanted, involuntarily, I wanted to learn to think in a different way. So for me, language has always been this difference in thinking. And so that's the difficult part, because having the upbringing that we have, it's very difficult to accept that, there's no right or wrong. There's just different. And it's so difficult for us to accept other opinions, or to kind of change the habits that we have and kind of put ourselves in other people's shoes. But I think with language learning, that is very important, especially if you're trying to learn a language that it does not really fit in the same background that you have. So for example, coming from a European background, trying to learn Asian languages, and vice versa. So I think that is the kind of reason for a lot of misunderstandings, because a lot of people, when learning languages, a lot of people are kind of focusing on word by word translations, and unfortunately, that's not possible. That's why a lot of foreigners, when learning Chinese, they're kind of like stuck in the English way of thinking, and so the sentences that they use in Chinese sound really weird. And that's why sometimes Chinese people talking in English, you feel like, what are they talking about? I'm not really sure what they're trying to say. Because they're using Chinese mindset to kind of translate into English, and that's not okay. And it's not okay because it doesn't reflect the meaning. So I think we need to change that mentality on how we learn languages. Another misconception that we need to definitely change is, I don't have a language learning environment. We do have language learning environment if we understand what are the components of a language learning environment. And if we go back to, like childhood, we had sound, we had visual, right? And so in the information era, really, you don't even need to travel to any place. You just get the material, audio material, video material from that country, from the language that you're trying to learn, and just listen to it the whole day. Wherever you are, that's where the learning environment is, whether you're trying to learn a language or whether you're trying to learn anything else. So with the information, in the information era, what we're actually missing is not information. Information is just too much. What we're missing is are the tools to kind of select what is important for us, and the awareness to do that. So I think this is what we need to focus on. We need to be selective in the information that we're choosing for ourselves, so that we can actually, grow, but also learn a language at the same time. And this is absolutely possible if we consider language as an element of the environments where we are, and then we include it in what we do. And then we just live our lives as we would normally do. And we would do all the things that we are doing anyway, all the things that we enjoy, but we just switch it to doing it in a different language. Of course, there are some psychological barriers that come with this, but there are ways to overcome them as well. And also another misconception that people need to kind of get rid of is, I don't have talent. I am telling you, I don't have talent either, but language learning and talent have nothing in common. The only thing that could stop anyone to learn another language is if they have a physical disability that does not allow them to learn even their own language. If your native language, if you speak it in a way that other people are able to understand you, then you can learn any other language. It's just about creating the learning environment and choosing the learning methods that are suitable for you. And if you haven't found them yet, or if you feel like, I don't have talent to do stuff, I'm not good at stuff, that is because you haven't found the right learning environment, or you haven't found the right learning method, the one to suit your needs. I personally like a quote that Einstein said very much. If you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, that fish will always think that they're an idiot. So we need to change this mentality, like one size fits all, one type of learning fits all, because that's not the case. But going back to how we learned in childhood, maybe because of the environments that we grew up in, maybe we really didn't figure out what is the best for us, even though parents are very loving and they want the best for us, but their knowledge is very limited in terms of what they can offer us. And to be fair, research is still advancing in this point. So, it's just a matter of understanding how all of these influences and making the decision to make a change depending on what we want to achieve. So before we go into the Q&A session, I would like to kind of have a recap. Input as much as you can, and so that you can have some output. And by input, I mean listening, watching, listening to radio, listening to podcasts in the language that you're trying to learn, watching movies from that country, or any like documentaries, and then learning some valuable knowledge as well, and then practice output every time you have the opportunity. And don't think that if you don't have people around, like native speakers, to practice with you, that's impossible, or like you can't make any progress. Just record your voice and listen to yourself, and then you practice your public speaking skills as well. So we're much more able to do a lot of things on our own, if we are motivated enough, and if we are very clear on why we want to do that. Just waiting on other people is actually an excuse for not getting things done. Make language an element of your daily environment. Whatever you like to do, whatever you feel you're enjoying, just put language in it and do whatever you want to do in a different language. And you will see that you don't have to be in a specific country to learn specific things. To be fair, my biggest progress in Chinese learning has happened in the UK. And that was because I literally refused to interact with too many people in the UK, apart from kind of going to classes, doing my homework. apart from that, I didn't really go out too much. I was just sitting in my room watching movies, Chinese movies, listening to Chinese podcasts. And actually in the UK is where I chose my Chinese name that a lot of Chinese people seem to like. And so, my biggest progress was actually in the UK, because I created that environment for myself. So I am a living proof that if I could do it, everybody can. Use fragmented time, because now with COVID, a lot of people are spending more time at home. Just while cleaning up the house, just listen to something in the language that you're trying to learn. And don't think that that's not going to help. It is going to help. But, with language learning or with learning in general, it's not something that we can quantify as much. So I listened for like 2 minutes today, and then what is the actual progress? The more you listen, the more, the better results that you would have. And of course, very, very important, change your perception in the fact that I am, that learning happens in a classroom. All the environments that you cross daily will shape your mindset. So you actually learn every day. So it's very important to understand that. Again, wherever you are, that's where your environment, your learning environment is. So again, do what you love. I love what you do, and add that in your learning environments as well. So that's about it for this evening. I spoke a bit longer than I originally planned, but hopefully we have some questions as well, and up for a discussion. All right, I see that everybody has introduced themselves, which is good. Any specific for Mandarin practice? Claire, one of the things that I used when I was in Shanghai, because at that time I was using podcasts as well. It's actually one that is called Chinese Pod, I think. So I'm going to type it here. They've been doing that for many years, and they're very experienced with that. I think it's a paid app, but all the content that they put there is really good, and the way they explain, I think, is very interesting, and it kind of helps you learn right away. So what I used was I used those materials, but so the way they did it was kind of having a dialogue in Chinese straight away, and then kind of breaking it down, explaining all the elements and how do you explain. So having a bit of culture in that as well. And then repeating, after going through all the explanations, repeating the Chinese dialogue again. And you could literally feel that you can understand a lot better that dialogue. And so I was listening to that every time I was walking on the street. And I also, another app that I used for learning characters. Even though it's not very structured, it's called Memrise. But the reason why I liked this app is because there were it was kind of like a game. Each character you were kind of planting the seed, and you had to repeat that all the time. And then that's how you remembered it. But now, if I were to look back, I think the whole key there is repetition. So it's kind of like memorizing your phone number. The more you repeat your phone number, the easier it gets to remember it. Would you recommend following these methods before using more structured programs such as Rosetta Stone or instead of them? I have no idea how Rosetta Stone does it. I've never opened anything Rosetta Stone related. So I would not be sure what would happen if you would kind of follow Rosetta Stone first. What I would just recommend, really, just immerse yourselves in, if you have, and I think there are ways, 10-cent movies. This app, I think, is available abroad as well. And if not, then just getting a VPN that can access Chinese servers, and you can watch anything you want. There's so many movies on Tencent or Bilibili, or there are a lot of Chinese websites for videos. And the cool part is, so what I sent. No worries, Pauline. Go ahead and take care of your call. So I'm going to leave some kind of websites where you can find a lot of videos in Chinese, and one of the beauty of well, it might not be very nice to say that, but because in China right now copyright is not an issue, not a big issue. So all the material, that all the videos that you can see, that you can watch in Chinese are numerous. So I think there's a lot of material there that we can use. I know that I think I've watched more Chinese movies and soap operas than the average Chinese person. I would sometimes do long nighters, just watching soap operas. And if any one of you is asking me for recommendations, I never looked at how good that movie, like what was the rating or whatever. I literally just I randomly chose movies to watch. It helps also if you think the actors are, handsome or beautiful. So depending on what you're interested in, because it kind of gives you an incentive to continue watching. Any tips on practicing Chinese characters? That's where I struggled the most when I was learning Mandarin. Clear about the answer. So to answer Pauline's question, I would definitely recommend that you guys watch movies on Chinese websites, because in China, all the movies must have Chinese subtitles. And it's a great way to kind of practice your characters, because you can read the subtitles, but you can listen to what people are saying. And I think it's that context. I think that movies are kind of recreating the native language environment that we had. We don't have parents to talk to us in Chinese, but we have the actors. We hear their voices. We don't have parents to teach us how to read, but we can see the subtitles and we can listen to the actors to talk to us. So I think there's a lot of value there. And with the information era and Chinese softwares being more popular abroad, I think that's very possible. And Claire's question, beginner Chinese teachers tend to really focus on tones and pronunciation. That was something. No, actually, because my learning path was not the traditional way. So I never, at the very beginning, to be fair, I never attended an absolute beginner class. I have no idea what they teach in that class. I just started straight away to listen, watching Chinese movies, podcasts, the podcast that I recommended, Chinese Pod, and just listening to people on the streets, being very, very curious about what they could be talking about. And I didn't realize how much, by actively listening to all these people, how much information I had inputted, and how much information had my brain recorded. I realized that only when I went to the UK and I had that Chinese teacher kind of telling me that she doesn't want to teach me because, you know, I'm too advanced. And I was like, what are you talking about? But, you know, as a teacher, probably she was able to understand better my skills, but I had no idea. And I think I was just like a kid, really. I think that involuntarily I recreated a children's native language acquisition process. I listened, and then you have parents, you know, reading to their kids and teaching them how to read a few letters, and then, you know, they kind of start talking at the same time and so on. So I think it was just a mix of input and output, but I never focused on speaking. A lot of people focus on, oh, you need to speak right away and so on. I never focused on speaking because I didn't really need to. I was living in Shanghai where everybody was speaking English, so I didn't focus on that. But I was still kind of immersing myself in the language anytime I had the opportunity. So one of the other things that I discovered is that we have active and passive listening. So active listening refers to kind of you're intentionally trying to make sense of what people are saying. And I did that a lot. But you know, at some point you get tired because that's a lot of intense effort. So what I did later on, when I got tired, I switched to passive listening. So it's kind of like you still have sound in your ears, but you don't pay attention what they say. And you know, to be fair, we always have that, even as adults. When you are not interested in some colleagues' conversations, you know, you still hear what they're talking about, but you're not paying active attention to that. But however, that information is still kind of influencing your brain, and your brain is actually recording that nonetheless. But anyway, so it's very important to kind of you know, figure out what you're passionate about, and kind of trying to, you know, use that information and to create that immersive learning experience, learning environment. And I am aware of how teachers are trying to kind of teach in the classroom, but I think it's rubbish. I honestly think it's rubbish. And I think that because of the teaching methods, like the teaching methods are actually what are stopping faster progress. And also another thing that creates those teaching methods create the false idea that, you know, learning happens only in the classroom. And so apart from lessons, people don't do anything. So apart from maybe homework. But that's not enough. That's not how you learned your native language. You were exposed to sound all the time, right? So you listened a lot before you were able to say mama, right? So I think that as adults, we need to do that as well. Don't think that if I listen today for 1 hour, that's enough. No, like I always tend to tell people, you know, listen until your ears start bleeding. It's a bit of an exaggeration, really, but that's the point. You know, the point is to immerse yourself and go back to when you were a kid. Try to go back to the innocent mindset that you had as a kid and just take everything in. Of course, as an adult, you have an advantage over children because as an adult, we also have the ability to use our brains. We also have the logic. And then when you're kind of watching a movie and you hear what they're saying and you read the subtitles, right? You can actually make sense of that. I was like, oh, this person is smiling, and what could they be smiling of? And then if you listen to some keywords, words that you're familiar with, you can immediately use your logic to say, okay, so I can guess the meaning of that word. And so you have a clear advantage over kids to learn a language a lot faster because we have this ability to create logic connections. Whereas children don't have that. So I think that's why I got to learn in such a short time. because I spent a lot of time on listening. And once I was able to understand most of the things that were happening around, for the parts that I couldn't understand, I could use language to understand it, and then ask people in Chinese, like, what does that mean? And people would use Chinese to explain that to me, just like parents would do when when you were a kid. And because of that, I was able to not only learn the language faster, but I was able to learn the way of thinking. So that's why now, when a lot of people are listening to me speaking Chinese, including Chinese people, maybe sometimes my tones would be a bit off because I have all sorts of people around, and different dialects have different tones, but I never cared about that. As long as people can understand me, that's fine. And a lot of people think, even when, like, if they can't see my face, they can't really figure out that I am not Chinese, because the way I speak is, sounds like Chinese logic. But of course, they would think maybe I'm from the South, maybe I'm from the North, maybe I have a weird accent, maybe I'm some sort of minority, because I do have an accent. But, I don't think that the accent is important. It's kind of like, asking in London. London has 6 accents, just that city. So whose accent is better than whose? It doesn't mean that you don't really understand each other, right? And in Britain, you also have a lot of different accents as well. So I don't think that is something that we need to focus on. And even though, at some point you might kind of screw up a tone, Chinese people are also looking in context as well, and they understand from context too. So I don't think that's very, very important. So hopefully that was, helpful. You're very welcome to continue asking questions if you want. Otherwise, I do want to thank you for joining in and listening to the talk. I really hope that it was helpful. I mean, there's a lot more going on there with language learning, but I think I tried to cover today what I think is the first obstacle that we need to overcome in language learning, and that is our mindset. Learning happens everywhere. Wherever we are, that's where the learning environment is. And, depending on why we want to learn things and what is our motivation, choosing the right content is very important. Because traditional education system really is kind of like targeting the majority, and we all learn in different ways. We're all different, like interested in different topics, and just trying to learn something that you're not interested in, I think, is a waste of time, because you're just wasting the time. You're not learning anything. So hopefully that was helpful. If you have any other questions, feel free to ask. Well, it seems not many questions. We advertised it as lasting 1 hour, the webinar. So I do want to thank you once more for joining. Hopefully that was very helpful, and is going to lead to some changes in your own learning experience, and do feel free to keep me posted with what other kind of conclusions you reached, and whether this session has helped you in any way, or what are some of the changes that you've made in learning a second language, or a third language, or a fourth language. You're welcome, Jonathan. And you're very welcome. And I do wish you have a great day. It seems like there are no other questions. Do feel free to follow our accounts, both on all on Facebook, LinkedIn, and so on. We will definitely have more information coming your way, and including related to language learning, or language as an element of the environments that we live in, and many other useful environmental psychology related knowledge. So hopefully you will join us in the future as well. Have a great day.